Okay. All right. Everybody's here, so it's time. Doesn't Crystal usually say we're live?
We're live and you're ready to go.
Well, thank you. It's important that I hear that. All right, I'd like to call the meeting to order at 1 p.m. And I'd like to welcome everybody to today's meeting. This meeting is being held electronically in accordance with Section 238 of the Municipal Act 2001, the procedures for the meeting as per the town's procedural bylaw, and the electronic meeting protocol during emergencies. And I'm looking around and I do believe we have quorum. So with that, I have a motion moved by Councillor Stone, seconded by Councillor Wiebe. It is recommended that the Planning Committee agenda dated December 9th, 2020 be hereby adopted as printed and circulated. All those in favor? And that's carried. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, that's great. We can move right along. And we'll start with agenda item number 6, which is report from municipal officers. And we're starting with the community planning permit item. And I believe I'm going to turn it over to you, Richard, and you can do the introductions of our guests.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, this report addresses the release of a report documenting background research relating to the community planning permit bylaw project. And the report in question is a draft background and directions report, and it's one of the main deliverables for phase 2 of the project. Staff is recommending that this report be received and is seeking direction to finalize it to incorporate results of some ongoing interviews, as well as planning committee's feedback. We're also seeking direction to then circulate the draft report to facilitate public and stakeholder engagement as part of phase 3 of the project. And to support your consideration of the motion, we have invited Paul Lowes and David Riley from SGL Planning and Design, Inc., who are both professional planners and are here to provide a presentation on the draft background and directions report and answer any questions you may have. So SGL, as you may remember, are the lead consultants working with the town on this project. And so with your permission, Chair Alcock, whenever you're ready, we can turn the virtual floor over to Paul and David.
That's great, Richard. I think we're all ready now. And so welcome, Paul and David. I guess Crystal or Sam bringing them in.
I think we're in now. Hi, everyone.
Welcome, David. Welcome, Paul.
Good afternoon.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, members of Planning Committee. Happy to be here today. I'm just going to start sharing my screen and load the presentation up here. I'm hoping everyone can see that now. Perfect. So we're here today to discuss the draft background and directions report for Huntsville's community planning permit bylaw. So my name is David Riley. I'm a planning consultant from SGL Planning and Design. We're, as Richard mentioned, part of the consulting team working on this study. With me today, we have Paul Lowes. Paul is the overall director of the project, also from SGL Planning and Design. And also part of our consulting team. I wanted to just introduce, they're not here today as part of this meeting, but working on this project along our side is Dylan Consulting, and project manager on that side of things is Justine Gincola. So you'll be meeting her if you haven't already throughout this process. So of course, the planning committee is at least a little bit familiar, or maybe even very familiar with what a community planning permit system is. And there have been several reports to planning committee in the past related to the community planning permit systems. And I've noted 4 reports here in particular. The first one being back just over a year ago, I believe you received a report which provided an overview of what Lake of Bays was doing in terms of their community planning permit bylaw. And that's a little bit further advanced now, and we'll get into that in a little bit. Then this year, there was a few reports related specifically to this project. One of them was seeking direction from you guys to implement the new official plan. And part of that was to implement a community planning permit system to address development and site alteration activities. And then the last 2 reports are from the fall of this year. The first one being the information report, which provided an overview of the work program for this project. And then that last one was recent. It was a report providing an update on the final work plan and the community engagement strategy for this project. Before we get into what is a CPPS, because I do think that it's important. And when I say CPPS, I'm referring to Community Planning Permit System or Community Planning Permit Bylaw. But it's important to just note that the Planning Act is really what sets out the framework and the ability for municipalities to implement a community planning permit bylaw. So under the regulations of the Planning Act, the town of Huntsville is able to do this. So this is just a very simple graphic here to help kind of describe to you what is a community planning permit system. So really what it is, it's a planning tool that provides an alternative to traditional planning approvals framework. So as you can see from this graphic, it really combines 3 separate processes into one application submission and approval process. So like a zoning bylaw, a community planning permit bylaw identifies permitted uses and associated standards with those uses. So, setbacks, maximum height, things like that. What's different about a community planning permit bylaw is that it also allows for discretionary uses, conditional approvals, and variations within the bylaw, all within one process. So this next slide kind of gets into this a little bit further. And this is a really great graphic. I get pretty excited about this graphic, and Richard, I think you do too, because you provided, I think, an excellent suggestion to improve this graphic to tie in what the traditional process is compared to the CPP process, so the community planning permit bylaw process. So this is a process graphic that really tries to show what these differences are. So building on what we just saw on the previous slide and what I just spoke to, this shows what an application looks like from when it starts to when it finishes. So starting with the application submission and the creation of plans under the traditional process, so the top half of the graphic here, you have to go through several separate processes to arrive at a building permit. So you see after plans, it goes into either a zoning bylaw amendment or a minor variance application, and then to site plan approval if required, and then to your building permit. But also separate from that, other processes that include site alteration permits, tree removal permit. And you can see a little shaded box around there. And I won't get into guessing what color that is because I'm colorblind. I don't know what color that is, but you can see the box at the top. And if you look down to under this community planning permit process, that box is smaller because all of those things within that box in the top are combined into a community planning permit process. So you can see then, moving down to the bottom of our graphic, how it's simplified from the start of the process to the end when you get to the building permit, how a community planning permit bylaw, and through that system, you can achieve, you can get to the end of where you're building in a more efficient process that ties all these different parts together. And it's within a 45-day time frame, which is shorter than what you would experience with all of these separate processes under the traditional process. So the other difference between both the traditional and the community planning permit process is really that it allows for different permit classes depending on what's being proposed. And so you can either have a permit that is where staff is the approval authority. So all the boxes are checked, fits, staff can then just approve it, and then it goes right to the building permit process. You could also have where variations are required to the community planning permit. You can have where either staff can approve it up to a certain threshold, and that I'll get into that a little bit later. Or you can have planning committee or council approve an application depending on what's proposed. So there's a few options to consider, and which will be considered further as we develop the bylaw. But overall, you can see that compared to the traditional process, the community planning permit process is simplified. So now getting into our draft background and directions report, really what this is it first looks at what is the community planning permit system, and it describes the existing policy context of Huntsville, looking at the provincial, the district, and the town policies, and it sets the framework for the development of the CPP bylaw. So then the report gets into a description of a few things. So in the middle column here, we looked at best practices, what the new official plan says in terms of policy directions. We looked at the existing town zoning bylaw to see how is that structured. We reviewed minor variant applications and rezoning applications to see, what's been going on in the past, and then took all this information together and came up with a summary of all these things, but key directions for Huntsville to be carried forward to the actual crafting of the community planning permit bylaw. And then that's what's outlined in our report. So let's drill down a little bit on what's covered in the report. This looks at best practices. So there's not too many municipalities within Ontario that have a community planning permit bylaw or what's called a development permit bylaw. Under previous legislation, a community planning permit system was known as a development permit system. So some of you may be familiar with that terminology as well. However, there's some great examples of CPP bylaws or development permit bylaws within Ontario, including these that you see here. So Lake of Bays, Gananoque, Innisfil, and Carleton Place that are described in the bylaw, in our report. And we also looked at examples from Western Canada, where they have experiences using development permit systems that we think are pretty transferable, and we can take lessons learned out there and apply them in the Ontario context. So some things that we've learned from the best practices, they're really based on the overall structure and the administration of the bylaw. So how an application gets carried out under the CPP bylaw system, which is really where we need to start in terms of that structure and administration when we're talking about a bylaw for Huntsville. We've been conducting interviews with these municipalities to hear about their experiences in implementing the CPP bylaw, because we think that there's some great additional lessons to be learned other than looking at their bylaw themselves. And so we've done interviews with a couple municipalities, and we do have a couple more lined up. I believe one of them is even happening tomorrow. So some of the lessons we learned so far is that we really need to set out goals and objectives within the bylaw itself. So similar to how that is done in the official plan, a good way to do it, and this was done, for example, the Innisfil example, is to set out those goals and objectives. And this is to really ensure that the intent of the bylaw is clear, and to avoid misinterpretation of the meaning of the standards within the bylaw. And what's important is that the goals and objectives are informed by the public. So this is what we're getting at, and where we're starting in our process. It's really asking the public what they think. The second thing is building on this, the bylaw really should be structured around what is important to Huntsville. So, for example, shoreline alteration or shoreline development, shoreline protection, site alteration. We know that the town wants to address this in the implementation of the bylaw. The document should also be easy to read, make use of graphics and tables where necessary. This is good for everyone reading the bylaw, planners and members of the public alike. And also there's interesting differences in the way that we can look at how variances are considered. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but some municipalities look at this based on, an application is made if it's within a certain % variation of a standard. So say a setback was being altered by less than 20%, for example. That could be reviewed and approved and delegated to staff for approval. And we can decide what that percentage is, or it could also be based on a criteria approach. So, looking at a qualitative set of criteria, which is something that Innisfil is doing, for example. So it's interesting what you can do. So just moving to the next slide here. So the next part of the report looks at the Town of Huntsville official plan, and I know you're all familiar with this. It was a pleasure to work with the town on this new plan for Huntsville. So in our review of the plan, we went through it really to make sure to identify directions that are in there that say this should be applied to the community planning permit bylaw. So the first thing we're going to do and that we need to do is really to align the boundaries of if you picture within a zoning bylaw, we call those zones. With what we're calling these zones in a community planning permit bylaw are precincts. So that's when I say precincts, that's what I mean. So it's aligning the precinct boundaries with the land use designation boundaries of the OP, because we really need to make sure that everything is streamlined and the intent of all of the official plan policies are implemented, appropriately, and trying to avoid where there might be a situation where the zone doesn't match with the current existing zone might not match with what it says in the official plan, and we need to make sure that the CPP bylaw conforms to the official plan. So in our review, we noted also many directives that are focusing on the environment, including policies to protect natural heritage, shoreline areas, and ensure appropriate grading and site alteration. So this is great that it's in the Huntsville official plan. Now we're carrying that forward into the CPP bylaw to implement the directive. So the direction is there from above. New official plan is great. Now let's actually go through and implement that. There's also many other directives like townwide policies in the official plan that should be implemented in the CPP bylaw. And these are things like off-street parking, where there's policies that speak to where those should be located and the size of the parking lots and what those should look like. And also related to active transportation. So it talks about, facilities such as bike parking. That's something that needs to be addressed in the CPP bylaw. So these are things that are going to be carried forward as we go forward. The other thing that we looked at was the Town of Huntsville zoning bylaw. So the first thing that stood out to us was the incredible amount of the zones that you have in your zoning bylaw. We counted 44 separate zone categories, which is quite extensive. And so what we would like to do is to simplify this and, as I said, make sure that it kind of matches or is in line, the precinct boundaries, what we're calling them, is in line with the official plan land use designations, and that there's fewer categories. There might be a need to have different things. For example, within a neighborhood, you might have some, if it's a larger residential precinct within an area, you would have parks in there that would be subject to a little bit of different criteria. So you will still have those things similar to a zoning bylaw, but the intent is really to simplify everything. And as the zoning bylaw is older than the town's official plan, we're also going to need to make sure that the definitions are updated really to reflect the updated town, district, and provincial policies. And an example of something that the town has already done is the secondary units definition. And the town put forward an amendment already, which Kirsten and Richard shared with us, which is something good that obviously will be carried forward into the CPP bylaw. And building on what I discussed earlier about the town-wide policies in the official plan, those have to be, there's standards within the existing bylaw that also apply kind of broadly. And they need to be updated to reflect the intent of the OP policies. So landscaping requirements or off-street parking requirements, things like that. Another fun little thing that we did was we looked at the minor variance and rezoning applications that have been happening across the town. And we wanted to see, is there anything that's coming up regularly here that we, maybe we need to look at updating standards to make sure that, well, if this is something that we're okay with, then let's change the standard to make sure that there's not always constant applications and adding to the process, things like that. And so for minor variances, we noted many applications for setbacks, lot coverage, garage placement, and size. Many of these are in the rural area or along the shoreline, in shoreline areas. So we'll be reviewing these in greater detail once we get into crafting the CPP bylaw and comparing them to standards to see if there's anything that we need to change. Similarly, for rezoning applications, one of the more frequent rezoning matters is residential applications to permit alternate dwelling types within a zone. And the official plan is kind of, getting into permitting different dwelling types within a land use designation, bringing the CPP bylaw in line with that, where you broaden that and reduce the number of residential zones. So a semi versus a single really shouldn't be separated out. There's also a lot of applications related to rural new lots and lot sizes and setbacks from natural features along the shoreline. So again, we're going to be looking at all of these things in greater detail. And so all of this led to many of the key directions that you see within the report. And section 7 is kind of a big long list. It's almost like a shopping list or a to-do list of things to do when we're actually putting together the zoning bylaw. And many of them I've already discussed in this presentation, but generally I thought a good way to summarize them, and this is the way that they're summarized in the executive summary. You might recognize this, but it's really kind of 4 categories. So there's the bylaw structure. So this is ensuring that, all legislative and requirements are addressed and, creating that easy to read document with diagrams, tables, figures, things like that to make sure that it's easy to understand, read, interpret, all of that. And then there's directions related to the precinct boundaries. And I think this is important to get right, to make sure that there's alignment with the OP land use designations, not having those conflicting things between the CPP bylaw and the official plan. The CPP bylaw will conform to the official plan, and also simplifying fewer precincts than the existing zones. There's also directions related to the application process or the administration of the bylaw. So determining the best approach to address variances. Is it going to be criteria based? Is it going to be based on a percentage of a variation from the standard? And also setting out appropriate requirements for notice to neighbors when an application is submitted. What does that look like? And identifying in which circumstances a development would be exempt from obtaining a community planning permit system. You also have that ability because you might not want to have this process for things like seasonal structures or temporary structures. So the Planning Act lets a CPP bylaw exempt certain matters from the requirement for a permit. And then there's also directions related to specific standards for the precincts. So ensuring that the policies of the official plan are carried through and implemented within the bylaw itself, and strengthening existing zoning standards to implement those policies where possible. So in terms of next steps, I mentioned earlier that we've already conducted some interviews with Lake of Bays and Gananoque, and interviews that are happening soon. I believe it's Carlton Place that's tomorrow. I might have that mixed up, but and Innisfil sometime next week. And again, that's really to get their lessons learned on how is it going with your bylaw, and is there anything that we should know, or anything that's working really well, or you wish you had done something different, things like that. And then we'll finalize our background and directions report based on feedback from those interviews, feedback from the planning committee. Curious to see what all of you think, and of course, feedback from the public. And so the last slide here is where we're at in the study process. As Richard mentioned, this is really phase 2, where we're at the background directions report. In January and February, there's going to be a lot happening as we're moving into the community and stakeholder consultation phase. And it's a good time to be doing that now that this is a lot of information, I think, to put forward, and we need to make sure that it's we think that it's now in a place where the public can digest this, understand what is a CPP bylaw. Here's some examples of what some look like, and what do we want from ours? And that's the kind of questions that are going to be asked in January and February. There's a stakeholder meeting. The project website will be updated, and a real focus on public education. There'll be an online survey for people. A mapping tool will also be launched where people can geographically, identify this is an area where I'm concerned about this issue, or things like that. And to complement this, there's also going to be some social media content which is being developed, and our newsletters, and then also a public open house at the end of phase 3 there. So this concludes the presentation. I know it's a lot to digest, and I did go longer than I had anticipated, but I hope I covered everything off, and I hope that it was a good way to distill what was in our report, and we're happy to proceed with questions now.
David, thank you very much. Richard, do you have anything else to add before I read the motion and turn it over to committee, or should I just go forward?
No, you can go ahead. Thank you very much, David. That was a great presentation.
We're not going to let him get away, though, because we're going to have a whole bunch of questions. It's a very comprehensive report, and very much appreciated for that. And of course, anything that's that comprehensive and full of that much information, it begs a lot of questions. So, but thank you for the presentation. With that, I will read the motion before I turn it over to committee. I have a motion moved by Councillor Armour, seconded by Councillor Fitzgerald. It is recommended that Report Development 2021-26 Community Planning Permit Bylaw Draft Background and Directions Report be received, and that staff be directed to finalize the Community Planning Permit System Draft Background and Directions Report to incorporate the results of ongoing interviews as part of the best practice review exercise, as well as any feedback resulting from the presentation of this report to Planning Committee. And further, that staff be authorized to circulate this report to start public engagement and community input as part of phase 3 of the work plan. So with that, I know I have questions, but that's not for me. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to committee. And I see her worship, Mayor Terziano, you can start.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you guys for the presentation. It was great. I love what you say about making this a simple document to follow and understand or process. I may have a hard time getting used to the word precincts, but I'd be happy to see the zoning downsized to the numbers we have. My first question actually is within the report itself, more so than your presentation, but that was where we talk about, we've had 200 different applications going forward, which outlined, or 200 applications that sort of outlines for us the types of applications we get. And I'm wondering, what's the time frame of those? Like, is this since our last zoning amendment or our last, like, a year, 2 years?
So this is actually over a long period of time. I'm not sure exactly the length of time, but it was an export basically of all the applications. I'm fairly certain that have occurred that are within the town's system that kind of spews out the data. I can't remember the name of the system now, but it was exported to us and we reviewed it through there.
Richard, would you be able to?
Yes, definitely, I can help with that. So the system is called MARMAC, or the Land Information System. And we looked at, we exported all applications from 2008 on, just to get all the decisions relating to the 2008 enforced bylaw, zoning bylaw.
If I might, just one follow-up, Madam Chair, and then I'll go. So with these numbers of applications, is the community planning permit system likely to handle all of these? Or would there be some that would fall outside of this process or this bylaw?
So through you, Madam Chair, it would be. So the community planning permit system would handle all of these applications because these ones were specifically zoning bylaw amendments and minor variance applications. And so what's good is that it would handle all of these plus any other applications associated with these ones that would have led to a site plan approval process or a site alteration permit or tree removal application. And so it would actually kind of help a little even more than that. The whole process is streamlined, and I think I see Paul wanting to say something, or
Once you're done,
I'm finished.
Madam Chair, if I could just add, that doesn't mean that this committee may see all of those. With the new process, many of those will just go to your staff. People have to submit a permit, and that permit may just be automatically approved. It may be that they want a slight amendment through the permit, and that amendment will just simply be addressed by staff, check, or it would come to this committee. So that doesn't mean this committee will see all of them. Some of them will be already addressed beforehand. Some of the more significant ones will definitely come to the committee.
That's helpful. Thank you for that. Okay, I'll move to see if there's someone else who would like to. Yes, Councillor Armour, followed by Councillor Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Chair Alcock. Just a quick question. How does this work with the upper tier municipality and the click process? Does that make it streamlined better, or does it cause any ripples in it?
So with I believe all of these processes are I believe the town has the approval authority currently on zoning bylaw and minor variance applications in terms of the committee of adjustment anyway. So I believe that it would be it wouldn't impact in terms of these applications that are addressed. I believe the town is currently the approval authority for all of these matters.
So if I may, to follow up on that, David, in essence, if we require for certain zoning bylaw amendments, reports from the district on servicing or whatever, that still is required. It doesn't change that. It's, that would still be incorporated in a report to staff or to committee. I think, that's the way I interpret that.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. All right, Councillor Armour, are you okay, or follow up? Yep. Okay, Councillor Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Chair Alcock, and apologies for everyone. I had a hard time logging in at the beginning of the meeting. I don't see any mention of shore road allowance in the process or purchase. Is this something that we should consider being inclusive in this? And is this an opportunity for us to address different levels of shore road allowance according to use and perceived use and value?
Thank you for that. I see that Ms. Maxwell would like to respond to that. Director Maxwell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The disposition of the town road allowances and shore road allowances would be a wholly separate process. We can't combine that into the community planning permit system. So we'll maintain our existing process and levels of different shore roads that were approved by committee in 2019.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, if there may I ask a question while anyone else is thinking? Your worship, Mayor Terziano.
Thank you. I have one just really quick one. Thank you, Madam Chair. In the slideshow, you showed the community planning permit system in the little box at 45 days. And this might be a question actually for Kirsten, what's the general number of days the way we're doing it now? I noticed the box was much bigger, so I'm sure it's much longer, but what are we comparing to?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The different types of applications have different requirements wherein they have to be approved within a certain number of days or they can be appealed automatically to the LPAT. Currently, a zoning amendment can be appealed if no decision's been issued within 90 days. Our process right now, and I'll look to Richard to confirm, is running close to 90 days with the notice period, the scheduling, the hearing, and then approvals afterwards with an appeal period. So some applications, of course, depending on workload, are taking a bit longer than we might like, but site plans, shoreline residential site plans are about 4 weeks, and minor variances are 8 to 10, depending when we get them in the cycle.
So it's fair to say that the development community should like this new process.
I believe so, yes.
Councillor Wiebe.
Thank you, Chair Alcock. I know I've mentioned this before, but I'm just wondering if our guests can speak to the idea that while I fully grasp this process for a new permit, a new build, et cetera, how do some of the items like post-build, how did some of those items that would normally fall under perhaps a bylaw, like someone constructing a fence, how would they fall into or get rolled into this CPP, and how do we convey that to the general public?
David, Paul?
Sure. So through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Wiebe, I believe it wouldn't impact someone building a fence, for instance. This wouldn't impact that process at all. It wouldn't impact anything so if you need a building permit and you are compliant with what's in the community planning permit system, or with what's set out in the community planning permit bylaw, that permit would simply be issued, and then you could go right to the building permit process. But you do have the ability to have exemptions within the community planning permit bylaw. So some of those things where the town thinks that it's not necessary to go through that process, they could set out in the bylaw, which could address, I think, some of what you're getting at there.
Councillor Wiebe, you good with that? Okay. If I may, as I said, it was a comprehensive report, and a couple of things did stick out or stand out for me, and I'm referring to the chart on page 12 that compares the two, the zoning bylaw and the CPP bylaw, and in reference to public consultation and appeal rights. And it struck me that, so under zoning bylaws, we have requires mandatory public meetings. And under a CPP, it does not require mandatory public meetings as part of the development application. And under appeal rights, only the applicant has the right to appeal in a decision on a CPP application. So I look at those two combined, and would the reaction from the public, or am I right to react by saying, does this look like we're taking public input away?
Perhaps I could take a first stab at that, Madam Chair. So you're right in what you're reading. I think that what we want to stress, particularly through the public education component, is that the public consultation is front-ended front-ended in a CPP bylaw process where it's all in the development of the bylaw itself. And that's why it's so important to get that feedback from the public now. There are notice requirements that can be set out in a CPP bylaw to notify the public of permit applications that are put in. And then through that, they'd be able to provide input. But as you correctly stated, only the applicant is able to appeal a CPP application. Paul, did you have anything to add to that?
Certainly, just on the public consultation, Madam Chair, as you see in the table, it talks about mandatory public consultation. It does not mean that this committee or council couldn't decide on some of those more significant permit applications to hold a meeting and to hear from the public. So it's up to, and we can try and address that in the bylaw as well, of the opportunity to hold a public meeting.
I think from my perspective, I think if there would be some attention to that, because my take on that when I see it is we've just excluded the public. And I do have a follow-up question on this. It's with respect to one of your example municipalities, Innisfil, which I think are doing some really cool things. But the reference would be, I wonder when Friday Harbor was approved. Was it approved through its community planning permit process or before?
Through you, Madam Chair. David and I were involved in the later parts of Friday Harbor on behalf of the municipality. The early part was not, actually none of it is. It was a separate OPA, ZBA process that went to the Ontario Municipal Board. It got approved. They've then since gone through a number of amendments to that, and which David and I have peer reviewed on behalf of the town of Innisfil. And that's been a typical process. It hasn't gone through the CPP process.
Okay, that's very reassuring because as we all know, there's been a lot of controversy around Friday Harbor. So I mean it with all sincerity, that if we were looking at Innisfil as one of our examples and the public sees that we're removing public input and appeal rights, but Friday Harbor is an example of where we're going to get to, we might have a bit of an issue, I would think. So that was one of my key comments, and I appreciate your answers. So it sounds like we can do some work around public input, and maybe I'm looking at Kirsten in case you want to add anything there.
I would, please. Thank you, Madam Chair. The other thing that I think it's important to recognize is that this bylaw would be implementing the policies in the official plan that have also gone through significant public consultation over the last few years. So there's not going to be things that the public should be unaware of or don't recognize where it's coming from. That's what we're going to be doing in the next couple of months to make sure that we get as much input as we can from everybody, so that the exemptions in the bylaw, what requires a public meeting, what notice provisions we might provide, all of that is really clearly laid out ahead of time.
And I have to say, I appreciate that response. But again, just as we all know, we have individual development sites that are massive, and not everybody will have participated at the beginning of this bylaw. So I think it really behooves us to consider further along and how that public input might need to happen. And maybe we veer off what a CPP looks like traditionally in order to ensure that there is a placeholder for that. Maybe it's determining where you use that placeholder. I don't know. You guys are the experts, but yeah, David, I won't belabor it anymore, I promise.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one more thing to add too is that Huntsville would also be able to, through the CPP bylaw process, handle or grant permits on a conditional basis, and just kind of getting at a little bit of if an issue were to come up within that 45 days, a conditional permit could be issued, and one of those conditions could be the requirement for a study, for example, to be completed to the satisfaction of the town to make sure that a specific matter that has come up is addressed before that permit is issued. And
that's great. That's great. But then if you don't have public input, we might not know that we need to have that study. So again, I'm belaboring it. You guys have answered it really well. And I think it's important that we don't lose sight of that particular component, because I think it's really important. And I will preface this with how excited I am about embarking on this process. So this isn't meant to be a naysayer. I just want to make sure that we've really covered some of those things that we might have some reaction about. That's all. And are there any other questions or comments? Then I have one more, and I promise I had a whole bunch, but I can see we want to move on. So the other one was we're sort of excited about this process and the bylaw, because we've looked at it as a number of the issues that we've been dealing with will be covered in here. And so I just want to have clarity for me that, you know, we look at something like design guidelines, and this can be covered off in our community in the CPP, but it still is really important that we actually develop those design guidelines. It's not like this bylaw is going to create them for us. We still have to create the policy that fits into the bylaw. Is that's right? Like I'm looking at our director of planning right now and saying, we still have to have somewhere on our agenda that we need to develop design guidelines in order to fit them into the CPP. Is that a reasonable assumption? Like, it's not the CPP is going to solve the design guideline issue for us.
No, not completely. Each precinct could have specific items in it, I believe. And Paul or David might want to chime in, that we could say this is important based on character or something else, that we want new development to have certain attributes. But I'm not sure that we would be able to do all of it without design guidelines external to the bylaw.
Unless we turn to Paul and David and said, maybe you guys could just whip up some design guidelines for us as you're doing the CPP. That'd be really great too. Sorry. Would either of you like to respond, or if we've belabored that one too? David, your mute is off, so you'd like to say something.
So I was just going to agree with what Kirsten said, but also to add that we do, I mean, it would be addressed through a bit of a scope change to this project, but of course, that would be an exciting component too, to do some design guidelines. And we do have, at SGL, we do have a head of urban design here.
Okay.
Familiarity to do some design guidelines, but I as Kirsten said, of course, the different precincts within the CPP bylaw could have a different set of criteria that is applied through, well, it would be similar to how a site plan is addressed now, except it would all be part of that one process to make sure that, oh, that driveway, or there's too much paved area in that front yard. Let's address it so that you're saving that tree and you're, you know, things like that. But I think on a broader scale, particularly maybe for the urban context within the Huntsville urban area, it might be more of a guideline that I think guides the implementation.
So in essence, we still need to do that, which I promise this is my very last but very quick question. And that is, how easy is it if we adopt the bylaw, get through the process, and then we discover, I wish we had included this. How easy is it to amend? I'm anybody. I see David, Paul, you had yours off first.
Okay, Madam Chair, I'll take a step at it. It's like amending your official plan or amending a zoning bylaw. You'd have to go through a public process.
So it's not.
So it's not impossible. It's a regular occurrence. You just do it like you would do any process with a statutory public meeting and make that amendment.
Okay, so it's not incredibly easy, but it's doable.
Oh, it's absolutely doable.
Okay. All right, that's it from me. I have others, but I'm going to talk to other people afterwards. And I want to say thank you to both of you and to our staff, because I know a lot of work has gone into this. So with that, I've read the motion, and unless there are any other questions or comments, I will call the question. All those in favor? I think that carries unanimously from what I can see. So thanks again, everybody.
Thank you.
So while you are being removed from the meeting, we'll move on to the next phase of our agenda, which is our public portion. So I'd like to welcome anybody out in the public who's watching this to consider applications to amend the zoning bylaw 2008-66P pursuant to section 34 of the Planning Act. The procedure of the public meeting will be as follows. A brief explanation of the purpose and effect of the application, and any correspondence received to date will be given by staff. The applicant or their representative will be asked to provide any additional comments without repeating the information already outlined by staff. Any members of the public present will then be permitted to ask questions or provide comments respecting the applications. Committee will then have the opportunity to question the applicant, the planner, or anyone giving presentations. Once the public meeting is concluded, the input received and proposed amendments will be considered by committee and council. Any persons making representation are requested to first state their name and mailing address. Please note that presentations are limited to 10 minutes. Please also be informed that an appellant must provide an oral submission at the public meeting or written submission prior to the passage of the zoning bylaw. Otherwise, the local planning appeal tribunal may dismiss the appeal. If you wish to be notified of the passage of a zoning bylaw, you must file either with the recording secretary or with the clerk a written request for notification prior to the passage of the proposed zoning bylaw. Each notice of complete application and public meeting included an explanation of the purpose and effect of the proposed amendment, and notice was required to be posted at the subject lands. Notice was therefore considered to have been provided in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act and applicable sections of the Huntsville official plan. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Curtis Sabret for our first of three items, which is Z16 2020 HT Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of committee, and those members of the public with us here today. I'm just going to take one quick second here to share my screen and pull up the slideshow. Here we are. My apologies. So the subject property is located at 12 Deerhurst Lakeside. The lot is designated resort commercial and within the Deerhurst overlay area. And the lot is zoned residential 1. The applicant is applying to demolish the existing dryland boathouse, freestanding deck and shoreline deck, and construct a new dryland boathouse, as can be seen here on the plan, with a slightly larger footprint. The application also involves the construction of additions to the existing dwelling, as well as a new foundation under the existing dwelling. The applicant is applying to change the zoning from a residential 1 zone to a residential 1 zone with an exception for the following. To reduce the front yard setback from 20 meters to 15 meters for an addition to the single family dwelling only. To reduce the setback to type 1 fish habitat from 30 meters to 15 meters for the additions to the dwelling, and from 30 meters to 0 meters for the dryland boathouse. To increase the accessory lot coverage from 5% to 8.5%. To reduce the primary lot coverage from 35% to 31.5%. To increase the shoreline amenity area width from 5.4 meters to 10.1 meters. And to recognize the location of the existing dryland boathouse in the front yard of the lot.
Curtis, I'm sorry to interrupt. Apologies. It was just pointed out to me. I was looking, had my head down, and your slide is not carrying on. It's still on number 1.
Oh, my apologies.
No worries. I should have picked it up. Thank goodness I guess I'm capable.
Yeah, no, I thank you for that, Madam Chair. It's weird. It's on all 3 of my screens, and the screen it's showing on is the only one that's not moving.
We'll never get Zoom absolutely right, so no necessary. Okay.
So, work in progress. Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, for pointing that out. I also just, while I'm pointing things out, I would just like committee to note that the requested width of the shoreline amenity area has increased from 9.5 meters to 10.1 meters. The increase is required to allow for the slight rotation of the dryland boathouse to be more parallel with the shoreline. So committee will note that in the report that was published in the agenda, the boathouse was slightly askew. This amended plan on the screen here shows it parallel with the shoreline, but that necessitated a 2-foot increase in the shoreline amenity area width. Despite the increase, the existing shoreline amenity area width is decreasing from 11.1 meters to 10.1 meters. And I would note that any previously disturbed areas will be reestablished with shoreline vegetation through site plan control. In accordance with the policies of Part B of the official plan, an environmental assessment was completed by GEMS in support of a reduced setback to type 1 fish habitat from 30 meters to 15 meters, and again from 30 meters to 0 meters for the dryland boathouse. The study identified the shoreline abutting this lot as type 1 fish habitat, noting that the overall fish habitat in the near shore is very good for a variety of species, but not considered to be sensitive or critical habitat. The author states that the proposed development will have no direct or indirect impact on the habitat subject to the implementation of their recommendations. And these include the removal of the boathouse and deck by hand, the use of construction mitigation, the revegetation of the portions of the shoreline buffer that are disturbed. And all of these will be implemented again through site plan control. In regards to the proposed additions to the dwelling, they'll primarily be located to the rear of the existing dwelling or in the general location of an existing deck, and would really just represent a modest increase in the overall footprint area of the dwelling. As a result, the lot will continue to meet the design principles for shoreline residential development and would be considered minor in relation to the surrounding resort commercial development. The application was circulated in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act. No objections have been received. The application appears to conform to the policies of the official plan and provincial policy statement, and therefore staff are recommending approval.
Thank you, Curtis. And with that, I would like to call upon the applicant or their representative to provide any additional comments.
The applicant or their representative are reminded to use the raised hand button or press *9 on their telephone to indicate that they would like to address committee. And Chair Alcott, I can see that there is one hand raised, so we'll bring them into the meeting now. Please note that during the transition, your video panel will be momentarily interrupted. Once you've been added to the meeting, your video will appear in the committee member panel. Please have your microphone and video, if possible, turned on before you begin speaking, and please confirm your name and mailing address.
Thanks very much for that, Sam. See, Savis, welcome.
Good morning, members of the Planning Committee. Savis Randis of Plan Muskoka, PO Box 5384, Huntsville, Ontario, P1H 2K7. I'm here this afternoon as agent to the Wilson family for this application and as a professional planner. First off, I just want to just state that I read the report provided by or written by Curtis and listened to the presentation, and I do agree with his recommendations and with his description of the proposal. It was accurate, and it represents what the Wilsons are planning on doing with the property. I don't have a lot to add. I think Curtis has covered off sort of some of the main points, but the one thing that sort of jumps out at me, because there is a lot of exceptions being requested as part of this application, and I just want to make it clear that every exception that is being proposed is either a recognition of or a reduction from the existing situation. It's just the wording of the exceptions that show it basically from what is permitted to what is proposed. Sort of may look a little misleading that we're actually increasing those matters, but in fact, all of them or most of them are actually reductions of those legal non-complying overages that exist on the property right now. So in many ways, even though there is an increase in size to a dryland boathouse being proposed, there are reductions to the shoreline activity area frontage, the shoreline cumulative width frontage, the The accessory coverage is actually coming down. It's being offset by a reduction to principal lot coverage to sort of compensate for it. And, there's no while there's a 15-meter setback for the proposed addition to the front of the building, it's actually not any closer than the building currently encroaches to the shoreline. And the same thing in terms of the location of the dryland boathouse is generally the same location as the existing dryland boathouse is. So as a result, there's a lot of tweaking in terms of the way this proposal needs to be implemented in terms of what rules needed exceptions. But at the end of the day, it's not going to be too much different than what's there today. And in fact, there is a lot of improvements being made to the property. And these improvements will be implemented even further through site plan control. Another thing that I'd like to add, and me and Curtis did speak a little bit about this, is the character of the area. It is a kind of a unique situation. We have a private dwelling cottage right in the middle of the Deerhurst Resort. There isn't, I don't know if there is any other instances of this, but it's basically completely surrounded by the resort. And this is a privately owned property that's fairly historic. The cottage has been there for a considerable amount of time, and the Wilson family has owned it historically as well. And they've told me stories of their dealings with the original founders of the resort. So they've been there and sort of seen the resort unfold around their property for quite some time. So when you're looking at character, even though there are some exceptions being requested for structures like a dryland boathouse that are not normally permitted, despite the fact there is one there already, when you take a step back and you look at the whole shoreline of this area, you do have that new Deerhurst condominium building not too far down the road from this. And on either side of this property, there is a considerably large resort structure. So I feel like something like this, even though when you're looking at it under a microscope in the boundaries of this property can be judged in the grand scheme of things, I don't anticipate there'll be much of a change or an impact visually or to the character of the area by this proposal. In fact, I think anybody sort of voting by it would probably have a keener interest in looking at the resort and not really notice this single dwelling that's located sort of in between two condominium buildings. So I feel like in terms of type 1 fish habitat, it's being addressed to the report that was provided, and those recommendations, as Curtis has mentioned, can be implemented through site plan control, which includes revegetation of any disturbed areas and maintaining construction mitigation measures during construction to protect the habitat. So I feel like everything is sort of being addressed by this application, and as a result, I do recommend the approval of it as well. And it's my professional opinion that it in fact is good planning as well. So I'd be happy to answer any questions the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Savas. Maybe we'll just, if you could stay put for a bit, because at this point, I would ask if there are any members of the public who would like to speak to this application.
Members of the public are reminded to use the raised hand button or press *9 on their telephone to indicate that they would like to address committee. And Chair Alcott, I can confirm there are no hands raised.
Okay. So thank you for that. Are there, well, if there aren't, then I will ask committee if you have any questions of either Savas or Curtis with respect to this application. Yes, Councillor Wiebe.
Thank you, Chair Alcock. So one of the details that has actually, I can't seem to find, is what is the actual square footage of the proposed new dryland boathouse versus the actual square footage of what is existing?
I'll look at it quickly, Madam Chair, and through you, my apologies. The existing dryland boathouse has a footprint area of 18 square meters, whereas the proposed dryland boathouse, and Savas, if you know the answer, please jump in and help me here. Oh, I believe it's 33.5 square meters.
That is correct. Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
So it's going from 18 square meters to 33.5 square meters.
Almost doubling. Okay, Councillor Wiebe, follow up.
Yeah, thank you. So I guess my comment here is normally before this committee, I can't imagine we would approve a dryland boathouse right on the water. And so I don't see the rationale for allowing a dryland boathouse in double in size to be allowed. So this is one part of the application that I think it sets sort of a negative precedent in this realm. And I don't think that because there's a lot of other built form going on around it, that we should simply ignore it. I think that this is one part of the application that I'm not comfortable with, and I'd like to see a revision on that.
Could I ask either Curtis, could you respond, please?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. In terms of mitigation, the applicants have been incredibly good stewards of the land. I included some pictures in the report. I'd be happy to pull them up for committee, but by and large, beyond a path down to the water, the existing shoreline deck and the existing dryland boathouse, the vast majority of the lands are vegetated. In terms of the increase in size, it definitely is getting larger, and Councillor Weeb is absolutely right that one of the goals of the official plan is to limit shoreline development and built form at the water. I think in this case, something that's important to consider is that the bylaw does limit the number of boathouses on a property to one. So although I think the difference here is that we have an existing boathouse that has a disturbed footprint area around it, the increase won't necessarily be exacerbating that, and they wouldn't necessarily beyond the increase from 18 to 33 square meters wouldn't be permitted additional development down at the shoreline that would make the visual impact of the lot worse. And really, I mean, I guess from that respect, it is comparable to a boathouse in that you can't really mitigate the impact of this particular boathouse because you can't hide it behind trees. You can plant trees around it to try to soften it, but it's akin to a boathouse, I suppose, in that respect. So that's sort of staff's rationale for it, and I hopefully that is clear. Hopefully I explained it clearly.
I appreciate the response, Councillor Weeb. Do you have a follow-up on that, or is that? No. Okay. So yes, Mayor Terziano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a follow-up to that. I was not aware that we were doubling the size of the dryland boathouse until a moment ago either. I guess my question is the structure, and I'm not sure what to call it. I don't think it's a dock. I guess it's a deck beside the boathouse or the dryland boathouse. Is the structure doubling in size, and that deck or whatever it is staying as well? Maybe Savas can answer that.
Savas?
Sure, I would have to through you, Madam Chair. So yes, the shoreline deck that currently exists sort of behind the dock, beside the current boathouse, and across the front and sort of beyond the dock's edge, that is all to be removed. So that is one of the reasons why, even though there's been an increase in size of dryland boathouse, there's actually a reduction in accessory lot coverage being proposed. And the cumulative width of the entire shoreline area structures is also being reduced because the deck does in fact go beyond the edge of the dock sort of towards the east. So just in light of, if that was like why the fact that we were able to sort of justify an increase in a dryland boathouse, in addition to the points that Curtis has made, that was one of the things I did discuss with the applicants, is that there's going to have to be concessions and reductions to other non-compliances on the property to compensate for something along these lines, even though, like Curtis has mentioned, there is the ability to build a boathouse on the dock, which arguably might have a higher visual impact. But beyond that, in terms of coverage numbers, like a lot of these other little structures that have sort of existed over the years needed to sort of be addressed as well. So there's been a reduction, or at least a proposed removal of those structures as compensation.
So just if I might, Savas, so the existing boathouse and deck is going to be removed and no decking will be replaced, just the 33-meter dryland boathouse?
That is correct.
Okay, and while I'm up, I might as well have my other question, which relates to the reduction in the proximity to the fish habitat. Explain to me why we're reducing from 30 to 15. Are you telling me that the current structure is already closer than 30 meters? So this is just something we're grandfathering? Is it at 15?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, if I might.
Yes.
The existing structure is already at 15 meters. There's the existing deck on the front of the cottage is at 15 meters. And it's actually more of a porch, I suppose, because it's a covered deck. They're proposing to basically replace that with a 3-season Muskoka room. And that the footprint area of the deck would extend. Right now, it doesn't extend the full frontage of the cottage, but it would be extended on either side. So the Muskoka room would now run the full front of the cottage. But at its closest point, the existing deck is 15 meters from the.
Thank you.
I think I should have read the motion. I apologize to committee before we got into the discussion. But to follow up on one point, Savis, you said that we were decreasing the lot coverage for accessory, and I'm reading that we're increasing the accessory lot coverage from 5 to 8.5. So I'm not quite getting that, or Curtis, if you could respond, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. The way the resolution and the recommendations in the report were drafted, essentially it's requesting an increase from what is permitted to the number, but that doesn't necessarily reflect the existing development on site. So Savis is entirely right when he's saying that in almost every respect, the development standards on this lot are improving, just by numbers alone.
Right, and that's what you were trying to explain earlier. Okay, thank you for that. All right, at this point, I am going to read the motion, and I have a motion moved by Mayor Terziano, seconded by Councillor Wiebe. It is recommended that Planning Committee approve zoning bylaw amendment Z16 2020 HT, changing the zoning from a residential 1 zone to a residential 1 zone with an exception to reduce the front yard setback from 20 meters to 15 meters for an addition to the single detached dwelling only, reduce the setback to type 1 fish habitat from 30 meters to 15 meters for an addition to a single detached dwelling, and from 30 meters to 0 meters for a dryland boathouse, increase accessory lot coverage from 5% to 8.5%, reduce the primary lot coverage from 35% to 31.5%, and increase the shoreline amenity area width from 5.4 meters to 10.1 meters, and recognize the location of the existing dryland boathouse in the front yard of the lot. So with that, are there any final questions or comments with respect to that motion? Seeing, yes, Mayor Terziano.
Sorry, but the last piece there where we're increasing from 5 point something to 10 point something, what is increasing in the shoreline amenity area if we're taking away the deck?
Right.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, so the shoreline amenity area is essentially the way the provision reads in the bylaw. Homeowners are permitted 25% of their shoreline frontage. And what the bylaw requires us to consider is the width of all shoreline structures. So in this case, it is now going to be from the edge of the existing deck to the edge of the existing boathouse. Or sorry, to the proposed boathouse. So we would be spanning that distance, and that distance together would represent the 10.1 meters of amenity area. Does that make sense?
I guess the question would be then, if it's designated as amenity area, they could indeed put decking back there if they wanted to.
And through you, Madam Chair, the lot is subject to site plan control, and I suppose they could theoretically propose decking.
Perhaps they could, because site plan wouldn't actually deal with that, because we'd be, in essence, be giving them the approval to do it now, right?
Although, Madam Chair, I would point out that it just occurred to me, and I'm embarrassed I didn't think of it initially, was that we are limiting the accessory lot coverage. So the they're really going to be capped in terms of total structure, total structures to what is being proposed. So if they're proposing additional decks, it won't meet the accessory coverage, and we will have the authority to not permit.
Thank you for that. I can see Savas is nodding in agreement with that statement. Mayor Terziano, does that answer your question? Yes. Okay, Councillor Wiebe, you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Chair Alcock. So in the motion, it read that we're moving the primary residence from 20 meters to 15, but somehow that contradicts how I understood the discussion prior, which was the existing deck is at 15 already, and they're just extending it. So I'd like some clarification on that.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And I suppose, again, really the way the resolution is crafted, I mean, it could easily read to recognize the existing setback of the dwelling at 15 meters, but the way it was written was to, just for clarity, so committee knows what the current standard is. So what we're saying is to reduce the front yard setback from 20 meters, which is the current bylaw standard, to 15 meters to permit this addition to the single family dwelling.
So in essence, what we're seeing with this motion is what, Savas, you were trying to explain, that in many respects we're grandfathering, that's not the right word in this case, but the word is escaping me, but recognizing existing parameters and then altering it, and the alterations actually are more favorable, is something like that. That's the way I'm seeing it. Councillor Wiebe, did you need a follow-up, or are you good? Okay. All right. I don't see any other questions or comments. So with that, I will call the question. All those in favor? And that is carried. Okay. Thank you very much for that. And with that, I will turn it back to you, Curtis, for application Z28 2020 HT Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, I'm just going to pull up the presentation. And hopefully everybody can see that. So the subject property is located at 1576 Atwell Road. The lot is designated rural and zoned rural 1. The purpose and effect of the application is to rezone a portion of the lands from a rural 1 zone to a rural residential zone to permit the creation of 3 rural residential lots. The severed lots would each have a minimum area of 2 hectares and 134 meters of frontage on Atwell Road. The retained lots would each have a minimum area of approximately 10 hectares and 270 meters of frontage on Atwell Road. In regards to policy, the official plan anticipates single detached dwellings located on large lots which front on existing year-round maintained publicly owned roads, and that all lots will have sufficient size and dimension and possess terrain suitable to accommodate the proposed use. Further, the plan states that new rural residential lots shall have at least, we've covered that. In keeping with these policies, the severed and retained lots would meet or exceed the size requirements of the plan. Constraint mapping has identified a portion of this lot as containing a deer winter area, areas of steep slopes, and low to moderate wildfire hazard risk areas. To address these constraints, an environmental impact assessment was submitted by FRI Corp in support of the application. In addition to assessing the sensitivity of each of the constraints, the environmental impact study identified potential building envelopes on each of the severed and retained lots where new single detached dwellings and accessory structures could be constructed outside of the natural heritage areas and natural habitat areas. Site plan control will be utilized to implement the conclusions and recommendations of the EIS prior to site alteration and development occurring on the lots. The application was circulated in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act. No objections have been received. The application appears to conform to the policies of the official plan and provincial policy statement, and therefore staff are recommending approval.
Thank you, Curtis. At this point, I would ask if the applicant or their representative would like to speak to this application.
The applicant or their representative are reminded to use the raised hand button or press *9 button on their telephone to indicate that they would like to address the committee. And Chair Alcott, I can confirm I do see one hand raised, so we'll bring them into the meeting now. A reminder to please have your microphone and video, if possible, turned on before you begin speaking, and confirm your name and mailing address.
See, my internet connection is unstable. Did you see that? All right, I see somebody. I see Lanny. Reminds me of, there we go. Okay. Lanny, are you on?
Yeah, I think so. You guys can hear me then?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, Lanny Dennis, Wayne Simpson and Associates, 3-76 King William Street, Huntsville, P1H1E4. Represent the owners. I think that's a fair and accurate assessment of the proposal presented by the planner. Just one item, and it has nothing to do with the proposal in front of committee today, but it caught my attention. It's one of the policies in the official plan that speaks to a maximum of 3 rural residential building lots on an existing lot of record. Just wanted to, on this proposal, there's 2 new rural residential building lots and there's 2 rural lots. So I would say that perhaps a 3rd rural residential building lot may be possible, or at least on the retained lands that a possible future severance of the 2 retained parcels may be appropriate, since they have enough frontage and area. I just wanted to point that out, just because some of the comments in there, I didn't want to jeopardize a future landowner bringing an application forward or prejudice future decisions on committee. The owners have no intention of doing that, but I just wanted to bring it forward.
Okay.
Anyways, yeah. So overall, I think the zoning bylaw amendment will facilitate the creation of 2 new rural residential building lots and 1 new rural lot. And speaking with the owners, they're satisfied with the present draft of the zoning bylaw, and reviewed the conditions, the draft conditions for the severances, and those are satisfactory as well. The owners have done everything asked of them from the initiation of the process, including the EIS, follow up with Town Public Works for entrance approval along the road. They've contacted their neighbors as part of the public consultation strategy, and they received 11 positive comments from the neighbors who have no concerns with the proposal. So I would conclude and just say respectfully request committee approve the zoning bylaw amendment, and then in due course staff can follow up with the severances. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for that, Lanny. Just stick around while we'll go to the next phase, which is I would ask if there are any members of the public who would like to comment or ask a question.
Members of the public are reminded to use the raised hand button or press *9 on their telephone to indicate that they would like to address committee. And Chair Alcott, I can confirm there are no hands raised.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Sam. So with that, I will read a motion before I turn it to committee, and that is moved by Councillor Armour, seconded by Councillor Fitzgerald. It is recommended that Planning Committee approve zoning bylaw amendment Z28-2020 HT, changing the zoning from a rural 1 zone to a rural residential zone and a rural 1 zone, both with an exception to subject subject the lands to site plan control. I think there's a, anyway, to implement the recommendations of the environmental impact study prepared by FIR Corp. Dated September 4th, 2020 and amended October 29th, 2020. No site alteration shall be permitted until the approved site plan agreement has been registered on title of the lot. So with that, I would ask committee members if there are any questions or comments with respect to that motion. Okay, seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? And that's carried unanimously. Okay, thanks very much for that, Lanny. And with that, we are going to move on to our third public application, and that is Z30 2020 THE Pantaleo. And Curtis, back to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So for the final time, I'm just going to share my screen. The subject property is located at 8 Park Drive. The lot is designated residential and zoned highway commercial with exception 1772. The zoning amendment would change the zoning from a highway commercial zone with an exception to a highway commercial zone with an amended exception to permit a restaurant with the exclusion of a drive-through as an additional permitted use. The amendment would allow a sandwich shop to operate within the existing facility. The subject lands are included in the residential designation of the town's urban area and are within an intensification corridor as identified in the official plan. This designation anticipates small-scale convenience commercial uses that serve the immediate residential area in which it's located, subject to certain tests, and these include community character being maintained, as well as safe access to and from the lot being provided. Regarding character, the lots really act as a transition or buffer zone between the busy institutional uses to the southeast, again, being the high school and Summit Center, and the adjacent low-density residential, everything to the north. Further, the interior side lot lines abutting the adjacent residential are vegetated with trees and shrubs. So therefore, it's staff's opinion that the conversion of 48 square meters of existing commercial floor area to a restaurant use would be considered minor, and the overall impact on community character would be low. In terms of vehicular traffic, the lot is accessed off a portion of Park Drive and Forbes Hill Drive, which are streets that service major community facilities, again, such as the high school and Summit Center, and are designed to accommodate a high volume of vehicles. As a result, the existing municipal road infrastructure is anticipated to accommodate the traffic generated by the proposed use. The application was circulated in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act. One letter of support was received and no objections have been received. The application appears to conform to the policies of the official plan and provincial policy statement, and therefore staff are recommending approval.
Okay, thank you for that, Curtis. And at this point, I would ask if the applicant is here or the applicant's representative to speak to this.
The applicant or their representative are reminded to use the raised hand button or press *9 on their telephone to indicate that they would like to address committee. And Chair Alcott, I can see one hand raised, so we'll move them into the meeting now. A reminder to please have your microphone and video, if possible, turned on before you begin speaking, and please confirm your name and mailing address.
Thanks, Sam. Okay, John, you're on mute.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you. Can everyone else? Yep, good to go.
John Pantaleo, 8 Park Drive. I don't have much to add to the presentation other than the fact that it's going to be a lunch counter. It won't have any sit down area. It's just going to be takeout only. And I think it'll be an added need to the area there from the high school and the arena. And I think it'll be a fun project for myself to do. So.
Okay. Yeah. All right, thank you. Stick around just for the next part. I'm going to ask if there's anybody, if there's a member from the public who would like to join us and ask a question or make a comment.
Members of the public are reminded to use the raised hand button or press *9 on their telephone to indicate that they would like to address committee. And Chair Alcott, I can confirm there are no hands raised.
Okay, thanks very much, Sam. So with that, I will ask Julie to put the motion on the screen. I'll give her a minute, but I will start reading slowly. And I do have a motion moved by Councillor Stone, seconded by Councillor Wiebe. It is recommended that Planning Committee approve zoning bylaw amendment Z30-2020 HT, changing the zoning from a highway commercial 1772 zone to a highway commercial 1772 zone with an amended exception to permit a restaurant excluding a drive-through as an additional permitted use within the existing 135.8 meters squared commercial building. So any comments or questions regarding that motion? Yes, Your Worship.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is an additional use. It's in addition to the salon. Is that correct, John?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So I guess, Curtis, then maybe, we don't have any parking concerns? The parking requirements are met for both the salon and the additional use?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Through you. In addition to the parking provided on site, which is mainly to the south of the existing building, and if actually maybe Madam Chair, it'd be easiest if I shared my screen quickly.
That would be great. Thank you.
So in addition to the existing parking that exists to the south of the building and the parking that's located in the garage, there's an old bylaw that was passed that does allow Mr. Pantaleo to utilize portions of the municipal land here for parking. So all considered, he would be able to accommodate the appropriate amount of parking.
Your Worship?
No, I'm fine with that explanation. I just thought that we had had issues before with parking. We used to have the trailers of canoes down there for the high school and things like that, but everything's been resolved, I take it then?
It has, Madam Chair. Yeah, through Madam Chair, it has. Absolutely.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Are there any other questions or comments? I'm assuming, oh sorry, Councillor Stone.
Just a quick question to staff. Not too long ago, this was a restaurant. Why does it need to be changed now?
It was subject to an application. The applicant actually had requested that it be converted to a salon back in time, and so that would have been in 2007. An application was submitted to rezone it to a salon only, and now we're changing it to a portion of restaurant.
It was a very nice restaurant too, as I recall. All right, are there any other questions or comments? Yes, Councillor Armour.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, I'm just curious, has the fire department been consulted on this for increased traffic or the type of building? I know you're talking about doing a sandwich house, but will there be restrictions on what he can put in there later on?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. The fire department and the building department were both circulated. The installation of the sandwich hub will require a building permit, and through that process, they will address all fire safety issues.
Okay. I'm assuming, John, you're expecting mostly walk-ins. Is that what you're thinking, or?
Yes, definitely walk-ins. Like I said, no sit down. It's going to be a basic sandwich shop. as in a hot table and a cold table. We're not putting a hood in. We don't want deep fryers or anything like that. More like, I don't know how to explain it even more than that, but very basic, just good, wholesome food.
All right. All right, last call out. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? Okay, and that's carried. Thank you for coming forward, John. And I think that's it.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Curtis. I think that's it for you.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, and we have now come to the end of our public section of the meeting. So now that all comments have been received, I declare these public meetings respecting the above applications to be concluded. And with that, I would move to our next agenda item, and it is the first report is over to you, Richard, with respect to the site plan approval for 749 Muskoka Road 3 North and the lifting of the holding. So could I turn that over to you, Richard? Thanks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will just try and share my screen. And I'm wondering if you can see that.
Yes, I can. I think everybody else can.
Okay, great. So through you, Madam Chair, the subject property is located at 749 Muskoka Road 3 North. The lot has an approximate area of 9.42 hectares with no road frontage. Access is provided by a right-of-way over an existing driveway. The lot is well vegetated and is traversed by a cold water stream known as Gypsy Bill Creek, within which is an online pond. The surrounding uses are residential in nature and also include a licensed pit and quarry on both the north and east side. The lands are designated business employment and residential and are zoned heavy industrial with a holding provision and an exception 0386. The lands are also zoned natural resource and rural 1. The site plan application is for proposed construction of a 2,787 meters squared building to accommodate rock cutting and processing facilities and associated site design. The lifting of holding application is to remove a holding provision that was imposed at the time the lots were rezoned to facilitate this use. The holding provision was imposed at the request of the District of Muskoka to require a traffic impact study to identify any required road and driveway intersection improvements and to secure an agreement to extend municipal water and sewer servicing to the lot. The business employment land use designation is intended to provide opportunities for employment generating activities and includes industrial uses including manufacturing, processing, and storing of permitted uses. The proposed development is also permitted in the M4H386 zone, which is the heavy industrial zone. And that is the zoning category which was added to the site through the zoning bylaw amendment in 2018. In addition to allowing the 0386 exception zone, the property is to be developed, can be developed having no direct frontage on a municipal road, and it requires provision of a 10-meter vegetative buffer along the entire western property line, except to allow for a 10-meter driveway through that buffer. With respect to natural constraints on site, they include the cold water Gypsy Bill Creek, an associated valley and flood-related hazards, and woodlands mapped as hazardous forest types for wildland fires. The development is sufficiently set back from all of these. Further, to mitigate hazard risks associated with hazardous forest types for wildland fires, clearing vegetation around buildings to accommodate parking, vehicle movement, and loading will assist in mitigating risks by creating fire breaks. A noise impact study was completed when the lands were initially rezoned, and the report provided several recommendations for noise abatement relating to the operation of the facility. Berms have been included in the site design, and the orientation of the building also considers these measures. The retention of mature vegetation around the perimeter of the site, as well as within 30 meters of the creek and all lands south, will also assist in this regard. Requirements to provide a 10-meter wide vegetative buffer along the western property boundary have not yet been met, but have been discussed, and the site plans will be revised appropriately to address this matter. With respect to stormwater management, the construction mitigation, a report was submitted to the satisfaction of the town's operation department and was submitted to the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks to obtain an environmental compliance approval in accordance with the Water Resource Act. Comments have been received from the building department relating to provision of fire access routes and water storage design on site. Comments have also been provided by the District of Muskoka, noting that all conditions required to be addressed to their satisfaction prior to the lifting of the holding provision have been fulfilled. No other comments or objections have been received to date. Here are a few photos of the site. And am I going forward? And let me just stop sharing my screen. The application appears to conform with the official plan and be consistent with the provincial policy statement, and staff are recommending approval of the site plan application subject to conditions to address the outstanding matters noted. Staff are also recommending direction be provided to approve application to remove the holding provision, and this can occur following execution of the site plan agreement. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, thank you for that, Richard. With that, I am going to read the first of two motions that we have before us with this. And I will remind committee, my apologies, I'm not asking you to put your names in, I'm just doing it. So if you object, then just put your hand up as I read motions, okay? So I have a motion moved by Councillor Armour, seconded by Councillor Fitzgerald. It is recommended that the Director of Development Services approve site plan application SPA 97-2019 HT, and that the agreement be prepared to the satisfaction of the town, and further that the mayor and clerk are hereby authorized to sign any necessary documentation conditional on all final plans, agreements, and drawings being to the satisfaction of the town and all other commenting agencies. So I will ask committee at this point if there are any questions or comments with respect to this first motion and the site plan approval. Okay, seeing none, then I will call the question. All those in favor? Oh. I need to, my apologies, everybody. I need to pause for 1 minute and just put the, I may have done something. Okay, hold on. Okay, I apologize, everybody, but apparently, Richard, you might know, was there anybody who wanted to speak to this? I know we're out of the public portion, but we are allowing the applicants to speak to it if they want to. It's apparently in my script. And do you know if there is anybody, Sam?
I can tell you. Yeah, I can say that the applicant's agent is listed as a participant in the meeting. They may want to speak to it, or they may be happy with the presentation already given. So Sam can ask.
Sam, if you wouldn't mind. My apologies, everybody.
Certainly. I do actually see one hand raised here, so we will bring them into the meeting now. A reminder to just have your microphone and video, if possible, turned on before you begin speaking, and please just confirm your name and mailing address.
Okay, welcome, Savas. So my apologies. I hadn't realized that you had requested to be part of this. Sorry.
No, I actually, just to clarify, I didn't expect to have to speak or need to speak, but I do appreciate sort of the opportunity to do so. I was really here more just in case there was any questions that Richard couldn't feel like he could answer, or maybe that I was better suited to answer. And I think his presentation covered up everything, and
okay.
Happy with it. So I mean, I'm here if there's any questions.
Okay, perfect. Now we know, and I've already asked committee if they had questions, and apparently they didn't have any, but thank you for being here. And so now I'm going to call the question. All those in favor of this application? And that's carried. Thank you so much, Savas, for being available. And my apologies for not recognizing that. Okay.
No problem.
So with that, I will move to the second motion, which has been moved by Councillor Armour and seconded by Councillor Fitzgerald. It is recommended that in accordance with delegated authority to lift a holding provision through bylaw 2018-69, the Director of Development Services be directed to approve zoning bylaw amendment Z14 2020 HT to lift the holding H provision applicable to lands described as part lot 20 concession 3 geographic township of Chaffee. Are there any questions or comments with respect to that motion? I don't see any, so I will call the question. All those in favor? And that carries. All right. Super. Thank you very much for that. So with that, Richard, we're back to you with our second site plan approval. And that is with respect to 119 and 195 Town Line Road East.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And through you, I'll just share my screen. And I'm wondering if you can see that.
Yes, I certainly can. I'm assuming others can.
Okay, perfect. So thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. The subject lands are located at 119 and 195 Town Line Road East. The lands have an approximate area of 6.85 hectares with 65 meters of frontage onto Ferry Lake. The lands also have frontage from Forbes Hill Drive and the private portion of Town Line Road East. Access to the lands will be from an unopened road allowance, which the proponent is acquiring from the town. These lands are currently vacant and contain prominent hills with steep west and east facing slopes. There are also rock outcroppings, mature woodlands, and a highly visible ridgeline associated with Ferry Lake on site. The surrounding uses are generally institutional, open space, and waterfront residential in nature. The lands are part of a special policy area within the Huntsville urban settlement boundary and are designated residential lookout. With respect to zoning, the lands are zoned residential 3 with a holding provision and an exception 0717, as well as conservation with another holding provision and an exception 0718. The residential lookout OP designation described in section B35 of the official plan and site-specific zoning have existed in the official plan and zoning bylaw since the mid-1990s. After being put in place to reflect an Ontario Municipal Board settlement respecting an official plan, a zoning bylaw amendment, and a draft plan of subdivision application. Both land use designations and zoning allow for a low and medium density development consisting of a max of 175 dwelling units. To ensure this development is appropriately sensitive to the prominent location of the lands, development standards require maintenance of a minimum of 55% of the site as a landscaped open space to complement and enhance the scenic character of the area and adjacent water resources. Additionally, the site-specific zoning standards require development to be terraced in general harmony with the existing topography and tree line of the site by respecting building locations to 4 general areas that are shown in a property details schedule. And this is the property detail schedule that is referenced in the zoning. And it shows the 4 separate areas that I'm discussing. And these areas are where building heights are going to be controlled differently, somewhat differently. Lot coverage and densities are controlled differently in each area. The upholding provision also applies to these lands, and for development to proceed, the conditions to be fulfilled to remove that holding provision include council receiving written notification from the district that water and sewer services are available to service the lands, and council being satisfied that a significant portion of the development in a previous phase or phases is complete and the lands from which the holding provision is to be lifted are capable of being developed within a reasonable time frame. The site plan application is for the proposed construction of phase 1 of a 3-phase condominium development. The site plan that I'm showing on my screen differs from the one in attachment 2 of the report, and that's because it was revised following the publication of the December 9th agenda to address some of the comments in the staff report, and it's the copy that I forwarded to committee yesterday. This revision does not change the proposed phasing. It doesn't change the unit count, building location, or site layout, with the exception of a trail, which was added. At build out of all 3 phases, the proposed development will consist of 16 buildings with 175 residential dwelling units and 1 amenity building. Phase 1 of the development consists of a total of 58 units distributed amongst 2 15-unit stacked townhouse buildings, 2 12-unit stacked townhouse buildings, and 1 4-unit row townhouse block. The buildings are identified in blue on the map shown on screen, and they're labeled as buildings D, H, F, G, and R, respectively. Several technical studies were submitted in support of this phase of the development, including an environmental impact study, a traffic impact study, a stormwater management and construction mitigation report, and a functional servicing report. The environmental impact study recommended various mitigation measures to be implemented as part of the proposed development, and these measures include timing windows for vegetation removal, installation of bat boxes to offset removal of important bat habitat, and sediment and erosion and control measures that should be implemented continuously throughout the life of the project. With respect to traffic impacts, the traffic impact study indicated that the proposed development would not necessitate intersection improvements at Burnell and Town Line Road East and would result in minimal impacts overall. The stormwater management and construction mitigation plan was reviewed by the town's operations department, and all comments provided were subsequently addressed. It was noted that an environmental compliance approval is not required from the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks for phase 1 of the development, but for later phases where water is directed to Fairy Lake, it may warrant an environmental compliance approval. The district also provided comments on proposed servicing of the site, which were outlined in the functional servicing report, and district comments must be addressed by the applicant's design engineer prior to final approval. Similar to other nearby developments, ownership of underground water and sewer services in the vicinity of Forbes Hill Drive must also be transferred from the town to the district prior to this development proceeding. As noted earlier, a trail along the emergency access road and along, which is here, and along the private portion of Town Line Road East has been added. Additionally, all stacked townhouse buildings have been replaced with a new 3.5-story sloped roof with rooftop patio design to address comments regarding height compliance in the report. This revision for the buildings appears to address some of the height compliance issues. However, for the buildings that do face or are on the east side of the ridgeline, to the ones that face Fairy Lake, additional details must still be submitted. An elevation drawing was submitted to illustrate the newly proposed 3.5-story sloped roof design. And it should be noted that all plans would need to be coordinated to reflect the final revised buildings prior to final approval. No floor plans for below-grade parking have been provided to date, and these details must be submitted to confirm that the parking spaces and ramp widths comply with zoning provisions. As can be seen from the photos on screen, the subject lands tree removal activities on site have occurred, and some dieback of the ridgeline have been observed, although there was an attempt to preserve ridgeline trees. The applicant has addressed this through revisions to their proposed landscape plans. The applicant worked commendably to revise landscape plans to ensure impacted Fairy Lake ridgelines will be reestablished over time and encourage woodland community restoration wherever possible. Although only required to maintain 55% of the site overall in a landscape open space, the applicant's landscape plans propose more than 70% of the landscape preserved in open space coverage. Some minor amendments will still be required to address tree preservation measures on these landscape plans and to include notations respecting tree replacement in the event of any unauthorized removals occurring during construction. No other comments or objections have been received. And I will stop sharing. The application appears to conform with the official plan and be consistent with the provincial policy statement, and staff are recommending approval of the site plan application subject to conditions to address the outstanding matters identified to date. And I am happy to answer any questions that the committee may have.
Okay, thank you.
And I should say, sorry, Chair Alcock, that I do note that in this particular instance, the applicant's agent and many members of their design team are also in attendance should you have any questions for them.
Okay, that's great. I was going to ask you that. And so before, I would like to give the mayor an opportunity to ask a question. Well, are they available for questions or comments? Are we going to bring them in for that? Or I guess that makes sense. I wanted to ask your worship if you would like to ask a question, because I know you have to go to another commitment. So I'm trying to balance both.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm okay, and I've still got a few minutes. Thanks.
Okay, perfect. So I think if the applicant would like to come in, so that we'll do that, and then I can ask committee about questions or comments.
Okay, so Chair Alcott, I do see one hand raised.
Okay.
So we will bring them into the meeting. As a reminder, please have your microphone and video, if possible, turned on before you begin speaking. And please confirm your name and mailing address.
Perfect. Thank you, sir. Hi, hello, Stefan.
Good morning or good afternoon, Madam Chair. My name is Stefan Sherback from Planscape Inc., 104 Kimberley Avenue in Bracebridge, P1L 1Z8. Madam Chair, I do have just a brief discussion, if I may, just to reiterate a few points before council's questions and comments, if you may allow me to do that.
Yes, absolutely. The only, as long as it's, we've had the staff report. So if it's similar, then I would ask that you be brief on that part. But if it's different, then that would be helpful.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I will not repeat anything, just to highlight a few notes. Again, thanks for providing me with the opportunity to speak to the committee on behalf of the owners, InvestX Development Inc. They are listening in, and we also have several members from our consulting team. Pinestone Engineering, obviously addressing the engineering aspects, the architect, Z01, and the landscape architect, Land Art Design, are all available for any technical questions that committee members may have. I have read the staff report. I'm fully supportive of their review, their analysis, and the recommendation in front of the committee today. I just wanted to reiterate a couple of key points here. The use itself, the forms and types of development has already been established through a long-standing special policy area contained in your official plan. This is also complemented by a very detailed site-specific zoning bylaw that contains very specific provisions to various aspects of this property. As an example, in the staff report, there are some specific provisions that relate to buildings that front onto Ferry Lake. And we do note that this application was submitted over a year ago. Our clients and consulting team have worked very closely with staff to ensure that these special provisions have been met or exceeded where applicable. We just wanted to thank staff for their efforts, considering we've had a few discussions with interpretations, and the site-specific amendment has been challenging, but I think we're at a place where everything is in full compliance. As indicated in the staff report, the first phase in front of the committee is again in full compliance. We fully understand and respect some of the minor changes to the plans that need to be submitted. When we're coordinating with a number of consultants, we want to make sure that the plans are consistent and complete, and we're very close to doing that. We've addressed those items contained in the staff report, specifically the height. You can see that some of the buildings have been adjusted in terms of design, and that was sent to you last night, and Mr. Clark did kindly show them today. Underground parking details, I apologize, they just simply weren't provided to staff. They are completed, they are in full compliance. We will forward them to you ASAP. And again, just as Mr. Clark mentioned, additional care and consideration was given to the proposed landscaping and reforestation plan. This is obviously a very challenging site with the long-standing established use and the intent of development being supported here. There is going to be some site alteration and disruption to the grades. I think it's pretty obvious, just to ensure that the servicing will work on the subject property. and to ensure that any of the nuances related to the site-specific zoning can be met. The applicant fully understands the importance of maintaining a forested ridge line to ensure that the development blends into a revegetation and/or forested area. And again, to reiterate the point that not only does the site-specific amendment look to provide a 55% overall landscaping plan for the property, that the applicants have provided a 70% vegetation priority on this property. The engineering is unique. Pinestone, again, has been working closely with the district to ensure that the servicing is in place, stormwater management is appropriately addressed, and of course, more importantly, that the emergency services can appropriately get to each of the buildings and the sites. Finally, I again support staff's comments, fully agree that the proposal in front of the committee conforms to the intent of your official plan. It's consistent with the 2020 PPS, Provincial Policy Statement, and provided that the minor changes have been submitted to staff, we would respectfully request committee's positive consideration for the site plan in front of you. Thank you again for the time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Stefan. And we'll have you stick around because at this point, I'm going to read the motion and then turn it over to committee for comments or questions. So I do have a motion moved by Councillor Stone, seconded by Councillor Fitzgerald. It is recommended that the Director of Development Services approve site plan application SPA 125 2019 HTE, and that the agreement be prepared to the satisfaction of the town, and further that the mayor and clerk are hereby authorized to sign any necessary documentation conditional on: 1, all final plans and drawings being to the satisfaction of the town and all other commenting agencies, and 2, the closure and conveyance of the abutting original road allowance being finalized in accordance with the conditions of preliminary approval contained in Development Services Committee Resolution number Development 23-20, and the subject lots being merged on title. So with that, I would ask if there are questions from committee with respect to this site plan application. Okay, no questions or comments? All right, well then, seeing none, I will actually call the question. All those in favor? And that's carried unanimously. There we go, no questions. All right. Thank you very much for appearing today, Stefan. That was helpful. And thank you, Richard, for all of the work that went into that. That's a biggie.
Thanks very much.
All right. So with that, I am going to the next item on the agenda, and that's new business. And I believe, Kirsten, Director Maxwell, will you be speaking to this? It's with respect to the LPAT appeal received.
I can, yes, thank you, Madam Chair. It's just to advise committee that an appeal was lodged for lack of decision because a decision on this application hadn't been completed within 90 days, which gives the appellant the opportunity to appeal. For the Hampton Woods development proposal, which is the end of Clark's Lane in Utterson, there is a concurrent subdivision and condominium application that were both submitted to the district, and we were working on holding a joint public meeting, but their applications were also appealed, so we will not be doing that at this point. But I believe we'll be bringing a report, just an information report, to give you details of the development in January.
That would be good to see about that. So they're following the identical process that they did for Langmaids. As to appealing before it actually got to committee.
And I was going to say Earls Road.
And Earls Road too. So is this a pattern? Do I say that, or is that something a bit?
I really don't know. This application was submitted, I believe, mid-May potentially. So there were a few delays due to things outside of our control with COVID. However, the district did do the peer reviews of the studies that were submitted, and we just received those results, I believe, in October. So it's not unheard of that it's taking this long, but yeah, there were quite a few questions about this development that were being raised with neighbors and all sorts of people as well. So it's unfortunate that committee didn't have an opportunity to consider it.
I know, and that, you know what, I apologize if it came across as this a pattern as in the slow, that's not what I meant. Is this a pattern as in people are just circumventing committee?
Well, I would mention that the Planning Act has gone through significant changes in the last few years, and the previous government had lengthened the timelines for things like zoning amendments for consideration. And I want to say it was up to 120 days.
Right.
Or even more. And then the current government, when they repealed some of those changes with the changes to the LPAT and a few other things, they lowered it to 90 days again. So
right. Okay.
It's all in an attempt to streamline. However, with our community planning permit system, things will probably be different. So
I would think, I would hope so. That's great. And who knows how it'll work out at LPAT, right? It might be interesting. So I guess, no, are there any questions of Kirsten regarding that? Seeing none, are there any questions about the general information? Seeing none, okay, then I do have a motion moved by Councillor Armour and seconded by Councillor Weep. It is recommended that we do hereby adjourn at 3:10 p.m. All those in favor? And that's carried unanimously. Imagine that. All right, bye everybody. Lovely to see you, even if it is